Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Essential Libertarian, discussing libertarian topics and philosophy. And we're going to give you the tools so you can achieve self-governance wherever you're at. I'm Kareem Mays, your host, and I have my co-host, Leighton Radner, here with me today. We're starting this new show, and we're going to bring in a lot of different libertarians on here and a lot of different people to talk about what's going on in our world. Also, if you're interested in learning more about libertarianism and you want to keep the Ron Paul revolution going, then you can go to lpmisiscaucus.com, take a look around. If you like what you see, you can get started. All you need to do is go ahead and click Join the LP. You can also click on Resources to learn more about the Mises Caucus and what they're all about. Now, I just wanted to start off by introducing ourselves, because some people might like to know a little bit about us. What are we doing? I have a few videos up, but my good friends from the Mises Caucus, might want to know a little bit more about what I'm talking about, what's going on here. And I'm definitely going to be bringing more people on the podcast. So, Leighton, what's your story? How did you become a voluntarist? And what's your interest in free market systems?
So I'd say it's about 3 years now at this point. Kind of coming off of the Hillary Clinton 2016 election, which was really kind of my first kind of jumping point into politics. I was kind of disgusted at what options were on the table. For me, I had listened kind of previously to, you mentioned before the show started, Adam Kokesh. I had listened to Adam's show and watched some of him dancing at the memorials and stuff, which was interesting to me. It kind of got my attention, which is what it was supposed to do. Did it quite well. I moved from that into a kind of already walking. And so I went to Dave Smith's YouTube channel, found Part of the Problem. Got involved in the Mises Caucus because I decided I'm in a small town in Alaska called Seward. It's only got like 2,000 people in it. The whole town's like a mile long. So, and we're right here on the water. I love the town. I don't really want to leave at this point, although I'm definitely looking at moving towards someplace with a little more active libertarianism going on. But currently it just moved me in a position where I wanted to get involved in politics a little more hands-on. So I decided to start going to events. I work at a job that kind of allows me to do that to an extent. I'm a night auditor, so I stay up late. So the things that drove me kind of here, I would say, were kind of Ron Paul, Dave Smith, and Michael Heiss to an extent, because once I was in the Mises Caucus, there was a small window where I thought about leaving, because there were just certain things that were happening with discussions that were taking place I was getting bombarded with responses on one of my Twitter accounts, and things just kind of got messy. And so at that point, it was just the fact that people were attacking certain people in the Mises Caucus at that point, especially Michael Heiss and Joshua Smith. I took real offense to that because I had watched Joshua Smith not only in LNC meetings, running for chair and talking to people that I knew personally. And so it angered me. And so I took offense to some of the Fakertarians crowd. And in a way, it almost pushed me into the liberty movement more, because it gave me something to kind of fight against at that point. Now that that's kind of over, and in my perspective, those people have lost and have been crushed into the wind, it's time to kind of look more towards to moving things forward and actually doing something in the Libertarian Party. So for me, that's kind of starting a small group here in my hometown where I think that people should be focusing on things, and I want to put an emphasis on that. I think the best way to make actual libertarian change is legitimately in your own town. Attending city council meetings, talking to people, getting involved in things is going to get you a lot further than just talking about stuff on Twitter. So if you're 22, 23, I'm 21 going on 22, I'm going to be running for city council. I'm going to be helping other people run for city council. So, I think that's the direction I'm moving in, and kind of how I got here in a sporadic way.
Cool. Very cool, man. Yeah, and I actually part of the Mises Caucus as well. I was 13. I came from the anarcho-punk movement, really had distrust in government based on what was happening. George Bush was the current president at the time, and I did not agree with the foreign policy. Now, I found Ron Paul. One day my dad turned on the TV, and Bill Maher was talking to him. I said, this guy has a different perspective. I got into libertarianism as a philosophy. And as I said, I voted for Gary Johnson and stuff like that. But I was never really, enamored with it until one day, my friend from college hit me up and said, there's a guy who was using a firearm in Freedom Plaza, just loaded it, didn't do anything bad. He got arrested. I said, what was his name? It was Adam Kokesh. And I watched a lot of his stuff, and he used the term voluntarist. And I said, is that what I am? And I really studied that, through a lot of different thinkers, primarily them being Murray Rothbard, G. Edward Griffin, Peter T. Leeson has excellent stuff. He's a economics professor at George Mason University, and a bunch of different other ones. Looked at Freedom Main Radio and stuff like that. And then I developed this philosophy further. And then when it came to this most recent election, I liked Jorgensen, but based on some of the commentary, I said we really need strong messaging if we're going to move this further. I kind of was looking at videos to see where it went wrong. I found Angela's video on the Mises Caucus, and immediately I was like, we need to keep the Ron Paul revolution going. So that's how I got here. As far as I'm concerned, people who criticize it, people who are skeptical of it, this is the roots of libertarianism. It doesn't make sense to do something and take out its roots. That's like trying to study Jeet Kune Do and saying you have no appreciation for Bruce Lee creating it. So those who criticize Michael Heiss, Joshua Smith, other people with strong messaging need to take another look and say, is this really what I believe? Is this really what I want to do? Do I want to live in a free society, or do I want to have a social club? I'm not saying there's anything wrong with social clubs. I'm here for much, much more than to hang out and socialize. I want to spread the philosophy of primarily Murray Rothbard to people so we can get out of this mess. And that's going to segue into what I'd like to talk about today. So there's a lot of stuff been going on around the world. If you haven't noticed, there has been a lot of different uprisings. Now, because there's a lot of different uprisings, I want to take a look at them individually, see what's going on, and then make a suggestion that you won't hear on the mainstream media. You won't even hear on alternative media. I haven't really even heard of it. So, ready to rock on this, Leighton?
Ready when you are.
All right. So, let's talk about our friends, as they say, down under. Can you see my screen? Leighton? Can you see my screen?
You there?
Yes, I'm here.
Yes, I see it there.
Okay. Cool. So, first we have, I want to talk about Australia, because I was watching We Are Changed. As you know, that's my go-to thing. I wake up in the morning and I watch Luke Radowski. Whatever Luke is talking about, generally is something interesting. I found him
Same here.
pretty accurate. Don't always agree with him, but I found him to be so I think this is interesting.
I'd point out that when I wake up and watch Luke, it's typically like 4 p.m. because I was at work the day before.
Fair enough. Yeah, you're doing night auditing. Sometimes I stay up late. So we have an interesting story here. Australian Prime Minister calls lockdown violating protesters selfish and self-defeating. And here's and before I get into this, I want to talk about just the overall kind of consensus that I've heard here, because a lot of people said if you exercised your freedom in any way that you were being selfish. And I said, hey, freedom, the great thing about freedom is if you want to stay home, go ahead. If you want to go out, go ahead. If there is something going on, I believe the individual has the best know-how to be responsible. That's my position. That'll always be my position. It's up to the individual, and they can make good decisions, they can make bad decisions, and they get the consequences for that. There is no perfect utopian society where everybody's going to always do the right thing.
So I would make 2 points specifically just right off of the headline from this story, which I find kind of amusing, not in a funny way, but in a kind of messed up way. Is 2 things. First off, I live in a 2-bedroom apartment. I have a 70 plus year old grandmother who lives with me, who has pre-existing conditions, the whole 9 yards. My entire apartment has had COVID. So I talked briefly on Facebook about this, and I know it ruffled a lot of people's feathers, but I don't have much sympathy at this point for any government that is attempting to lock people down in any way, obviously. And this headline, which I actually read earlier today, I think this exact news story, I didn't read it, but I saw the headline on Google. The part that struck me wasn't the selfish part, because I expected that. It's this term self-defeating, which is the most like, it is the biggest like asshole phrase to use in this position, because you're saying to the people who are revolting to you that you can't win. You're going to lose no matter what. And I think that's almost a dangerous thing to say at this point, because I've been watching the videos from Australia, and it's getting to the point where people are going to get violent, and they are going to attempt to actually do some damage further than what's being done already. And I feel for them. I mean, I'd probably be doing the exact same thing if I was in their shoes.
Well, I completely, yeah, I understand. To her credit, I understand why she's using self-defeating, because if you can, these people got into positions because primarily they're good with semantics. They can manipulate language well. And let's face it, politics or not, that is a useful skill. That's a useful skill to get. You can use it good or bad. But she's doing this so you say, oh, it's self-defeat. Well, we've already lost, man. They said it's self-defeating. I don't want to do anything. But that hasn't worked. But I know why she's saying that.
And the people are, in a way, already at fault to an extent, because most of these politicians that enacted these lockdowns across the world are from politicians that they supported. And so, from the perspective, and I see a lot of people on the left doing this specifically, with Biden now being behind the wheel, videos of Kamala Harris saying that she would never take the vaccine if Trump released it, but then, takes it the first day it's available, releases it. It's things like this that are going to happen all across the world, and that is what gets these people out into the streets doing this. It's not just the politicians saying something. It really is the actions that they take. And in New York, in areas like that where thousands of old people, much like my grandmother, were murdered. And in my perspective, it's like the people in New York should have the right to take that out on the government that enacted that. So I have a feeling as we move forward into the Biden presidency towards 2022, which is going to be a hell of a election cycle, because I have a feeling the red wave is going to just wash over a lot of this crap. But personally, I think that what we're going to see happen is these protests and all this stuff uptick even further going into 2022, to the point where it does become a really major issue in the way of, almost like soft, a lot of people think we're already in a soft civil war. I know Tim Pool and Luke talk a lot about that, but the effective is I think it can get a lot worse, and I think it's going to get a lot worse. But that's not necessarily a black pill. And I think that's also something that libertarians need to be talking about, is the fact that just because protests and those things are inevitably going to get worse, because I think they will, it's not a black pill, because there is something after that. And it's a decision that libertarians have to make, and anybody in politics has to make, on which side of that they're going to be on, in the sense of pro-liberty or liberty, or anti kind of human rights.
Exactly. And so I'll piggyback off your point. Those are all great points. One thing I'll say is you want some silver lining to this. If any of the if none of this ever happened, if if it was just business as usual, nothing changed, I don't think people would really do anything. I think they just go about their regular lives and say, yeah, maybe we don't trust these people, maybe you elected some people, but hey, you take the good, you take the good with the bad, lesser of two evils. Even if they're doing bad stuff overseas, they're like, well, but now that it's affected them, they're actually getting out. And maybe this had to happen for people to start realizing this current system of authoritarianism of the state does not work. And that, to me, it is just a catalyst. So let's break down this story. She said it was selfish and self-defeating, and then some 3,500 people protested in Sydney on Saturday after New South Wales tightened its regulations last week. And I do believe this was due to an 80-year-old man passing away, and the demonstrators violated the region's strict stay-at-home orders, and they got in public gatherings. They were saying completely no to it. Authorities are warning it might have been a super spreader event, which to me, like, okay, come on. Like, this has been going on a year and a half.
Somebody meeting in a park at this point is a super spreader event. These fucking people are smoking crack.
You're saying that about everything. The CIA is selling it. So, and okay, they had arrested 63 people allegedly, charged at 35 of violations, assaulting and obstructing officers. 2 men were charged with striking a police horse and refused to bail. Which I'm not saying, hey, strike. I'm not saying fight with anybody, because that's just bad. Because what they'll do is they'll use that as, oh well, they're getting rowdy. So I always say peaceful. Follow the non-aggression principle, even when it's hard. If someone comes
actually attempt to be mostly peaceful in your protest.
Be completely. If you have the option to be completely.
Right.
Because they will take anything you do and blow. They'll take one dude hitting that horse and say, look, they're all. So that's why I don't condone it. Because
just don't hit horses.
Yeah, don't hit horses. Horses are good people, as far as I know. So police have appealed for public help identifying these participants. It sounds so much like Jay.
They're not going to get any.
Yeah. They've received more than 5,500 reports on social media cameras. But interesting thing, Prime Minister Scott Morrison criticized the week's protests. He said it achieves no purpose. It won't end the lockdown sooner. So they're just trying to break their morale. It broke my heart. Had such a disregard for their fellow citizens. I don't know how to pronounce that, she said.
I tell you what, they might not have made the lockdowns go away, but they were outside and they were with people and they were in the sunlight. And those are things that he was not able to stop them from doing. And so I think that they win automatically by protesting, in a sense, because they are saying we're not going to obey your rules. So his argument is self-defeating.
Yes, exactly. Now, just to give it a lining, there were protests in Melbourne, across Australia, and he said, oh, it's just a small minority having self-indulgent tantrum.
The individual is the true minority. Isn't that Ayn Rand, right?
Yeah, and that's always what I say. They're always going to break it down. Oh, it's just a few people. Now,
a few bad apples.
Now, why are they doing it? A population of 25 million is under some form of lockdown. Delta-fueled outbreaks have hit the cities. Communities that urgently need it were largely spared or worse of the pandemic. And just to break this down, as you know, I'm going to get into the next bit of stories. Paris is also, it's happening there. Demonstrations are happening in Italy, where they're saying that you need a green pass to move around. And London, they're also happening as well. So just to really break this down, there's a lot of here's the point I wanted to make with Australia, with actually all of them. But I'm going to make this point now and keep reiterating. I like the populist, or I shouldn't say I like the people uprising and saying we don't like the system. As G. Edward Griffin said, it's always easy to stand up and say what we don't like. It's a whole different ball game. And in my opinion, it's a lot harder to say What would you replace it with? Now, populism's one thing. You can always put another authoritarian in there, or someone who's even better. And that person might be good for 4, 5, 10 years, however your government's structured. They might even, have offspring, and they do a good job for a while. But eventually they're replaced with someone who will do something bad. So, as Jacob Hornberger would say, it doesn't matter who's in charge when you have an inherently flawed system. And I think these are just inherently flawed systems, and we shouldn't focus on the people as much as we should just focus on a system that doesn't work. So, aside from populism, aside from centralized control, is there a third answer? I believe there is. It is Murray Rothbard. It is voluntarism, and it is bringing stuff down to your local community and finding out how to have interactions in a decentralized fashion on a voluntary basis. And I think that's one thing people can start looking into. Google voluntarism, Google self-governance. Take a look at that. So I'm going to move into my next story. We have President Elbow Macaroni. Some people call him Emmanuel Macron. I like being a goofball, as you know. So I call him that. So this is actually not good news, but I think it's interesting. French Parliament approves restaurant COVID pass and a specific medical procedure rule despite protests. So what happened here? France's Parliament approved a law early Monday requiring special virus passes for all restaurant and domestic travel, mandating a certain procedure for all health workers. Which, in my opinion, though, I'll say this. I believe in freedom. You can, if you want to do something experimental, do it. If you want to take something, if you want to use a certain drug, or if you want to use a certain whatever it is, and that's what you want to do, be my guest. Here's what I will say. I do find it extremely odd that someone would say you have to take something when there is really no reason that you would get up and do it yourself. What do I mean by that? If I have a toothache, does anyone have to call you and say, go to a dentist? I'll give you incentives to go to a dentist. No, the pain, if you ever had a toothache or any problem with yourself that's bad enough, you'll go to the doctor. You don't need to be told it. So
yeah, there's nothing that's going to stop you from getting medical attention if it's really that bad.
Yeah, if you want medical attention, you'll seek it out by yourself. No one has to tell you that. That's a point I'll make. So whatever you decide to do, I'm not going to tell people what to do because I ultimately believe in freedom. But I will say that should strike you as exceedingly odd that they're saying do a certain thing that there's no reason that you would either do it by yourself or not do.
So this is very similar to something that I believe Joe Biden just announced, which is that they're going to now make all federal employees get vaccinated. And I believe we are going to see a decrease in federal employees, and we might even see strikes, because I have a feeling that what we're going to have is I think Biden is underestimating how many people there are on the right or even on the more libertarian side within the federal workforce. And so I have a feeling that what is going to take place is it might even cut the employee base down by 20-30%. Now, that's going to take a long time for him to fill those positions because of the system that they put in place with the unemployment crap, which has already driven so many of the employee base that they would normally have away from those federal jobs and away from big cities. So we might actually see a situation where our government becomes understaffed because of similar situations where they're going to force employees to get vaccinated. And in the form of governments, they can just do this automatically, from what I understand. There isn't really much recourse that anybody can go through. So it really is just quit or do it. And so I have a feeling a lot of people are going to quit.
Yeah. It'd be really sad if the Internal Revenue Service was at a loss. I just, wouldn't be able to file.
What if there was nobody to fix the roads?
Yeah. Well, I guess you just put a cone over it. Like, hey, Get some cones off eBay. Get some traffic cones off eBay.
well,
we save money.
here in Seward, that's how our workforce fixes the roads. Is whenever there's a pothole, they put a cone in it and leave it alone. So it would work the same if I just drove around and just did the same thing. I propose that they just start putting pot plants in all the potholes, because it seems like a funny joke, and eventually somebody walking by is gonna have fun.
Yeah. Hey, who knows? So, getting back to our French friends, both measures have been prompted with protests and political tensions. The yellow vests are pretty intense. You can say what you want about France, but you know what? They really, really, if there's something they don't like, they'll protest about it.
Well, and I saw a video of protesters walking through France in particular, and there was officers taking their helmets off and walking with them. And so I think, again, much like I just mentioned with the COVID vaccines in our federal government, we're going to see something very similar there, where a lot of those people are going to say, enough is enough at some point, and Michael Malice made a point about this when he was talking to Alex Jones on Tim Pool, I believe the second time they did it.
I'm Alex Jones. You're fighting the war.
And during that conversation, during this kind of heated argument about policing, where Malice is making a point to say, hey, the cops are breaking the law by doing the things that they're doing. During that argument, he makes a good point for, where is the road to redemption for police officers who do finally say enough is enough. And Malice claims that there really is no road to redemption because they've done it for so long that there just really isn't, or at least that's kind of what he alluded to. My point of view is, if an officer recognizes what is happening is bad and wants to lay down, his badge and quit, I'm not going to look down on that person for quitting. Now, if they did some egregious past activities that were, above a certain threshold, then that needs to be, dealt with. But the idea that every cop who lays down and kind of leaves that situation, which is happening a lot in France from what I understand. I know for a fact, I was reading on Twitter that there were 12 officers publicly who spoke to the media who left. So I think that's going to happen a lot more, and I think that's probably going to take place in a part in Australia, I imagine, or is already happening to an extent.
Right. So in Australia, it quite will happen. I'd actually say, if you want redemption, mate, then you could be a private security guard, or you could be a sheriff.
Absolutely.
So, President Emmanuel Macron, I think I said that right, and his government say they need to protect vulnerable populations. I just love how authoritarians always go to, we just want to help, we just want to protect you, and then they get you like that. So what does this law actually want? It requires all workers in the healthcare sector to get a certain medical procedure by September 5th, or they could be suspended. Also requires a health pass to enter all restaurants, trains, planes, and some public venues. Initially applies to all adults, but will apply to everyone 12 and older starting September 30th. To get the pass, people must have proof they got a certain medical procedure to the full extent and tested negative. Paper or digital documents will be accepted. The law says a government decree will outline how to handle this medical procedure's documentation, and the bill was unveiled 6 days ago. Lawmakers worked through the night and the weekend to reach a compromise version by the Senate on Sunday and the National Assembly after midnight. Rules can be applied on November 15th, depending on the virus situation. Macron appealed for national unity. Good luck with that. And
there's that word we love so very much.
Yeah. And mass medical procedures to fight the thing, and lashed out at those fueling anti-medical procedure protests. So they say visiting a hospital in French Polynesia afterward, Elbow Macaroni urged national unity and asked, what is your freedom worth if you say to me, I don't want to get the medical procedure, but tomorrow you infect your father, your mother, or myself? well, I'm sorry, you know, Rothschild bankers don't have a soul. But well, he said protesters are free to express themselves in a calm and respectful manner. I don't. Does this dude know what a protest is?
Yeah,
He
that's
said,
not a protest.
"Well, hey, could if you're not too busy, could you not be like authoritarian? It'd be nice, if Gears of War 6 comes out, could you chill out? Have a couple beers, just if you're not too busy." He said demonstrators won't make a certain thing go away. Criticize people who are in the business of irrational, sometimes cynical, manipulative mobilization against the medical procedure. Among those organizing protests have been far right, and
Which I'd like to talk about here for a second, because I've watched a lot of these protest videos, especially, by the way, not a lot of people know this, but one of the best ways to get actual decent footage of some of the protests that are happening is from Snapchat, because the Snapchat map, yeah. So this is something I've been trying to get people to tune in on, because on Snapchat you have the map feature. And so if there's a protest going around somewhere in that area, you can go to that area on the map, zoom in, and kind of pick people in that area and look at what they've been posting. And a lot of times those videos will be kind of raw footage, without all the kind of news headlines and crap to go along with it. What I find with these protests is that I'm looking at half of the people there in masks. Half of the people there have said that they're even vaccinated from a lot of these videos that I'm watching. Maybe not half, but a big portion of them. So the idea to me that this is led by the right, I don't think is accurate. I think this is a hodgepodge mix of people. As far as political ideology goes, I think it's just people who are fed up.
You know how this goes. They use certain, it's right, it's this, it's these people. Here's the thing. As far as I'm concerned, to me, there's not really left and right. Left and right is something you use on your car for turn signals or directions. And I get the political compass exists, and I like it. I use the term, when people ask, "Are you in the bottom right?" Because they're like, "Wait, you're in the right? Do you like, I'm like, "No, I don't like Trump or any of those guys, but I'm in the bottom right," meaning I stand for individualism, property rights, the NAP and stuff.
I'm bottom right as well.
But at the end of the day, I don't like right and left, because you can paint so many pictures. It comes down to this. There are people who believe the nucleus of society is a collective. It is groups of people, or people who identify group. And then there's another group of people who think the nucleus of society is the individual. I happen to say it's the individual. And even if the individual makes bad choices, the individual still has the right to sovereignty, still has the right to figure out how to live their own life as best they see fit. Collective don't exist. They're just groups of people. A collective can't have more rights than a group. So that's what I say. Forget left and right. Individualist, collectivist. Which one do you subscribe to? If you're subscribing to collectivist, why? And I'll just end this by saying the Yellow Vest movement is mad at him. And yes, a lot of people have had issues in France with this. But here's the thing. Does that mean we elect Marie Le Pen? Well, that helps in the short term, maybe not. Does that mean that Emmanuel Macron's the only authoritarian who do this? No. What do I think? My recommendation goes across the board. To my friends in France, Australia, if you're fed up, there's a better way to do things than the state, and that is to do it voluntarily and to do it on the basis of human action and purposeful behavior. And that's where Murray Rothbard's Anatomy of the State comes in. You can find it on YouTube.
So, absolutely, pick up a book. That is, and one of the best ways I think to break through to people these days are kind of books in a strange way, because I feel like in such a world that's kind of filled with the online space, what we're doing right here, I feel like a book kind of punches through stuff sometimes. It kind of punches through that kind of social media veil, or kind of, television veil. So to me, like, reading books like that, especially books that are actually teaching you something valuable, are important. I'm picking up Jordan Peterson's new book soon. I'm excited to read that.
12 rules. Get your 12 rules for life going. All right, so let's go closer to home. Now, we talked a little bit about the lockdowns and what's going on with specific medical procedures, but I think this story is particularly interesting. So Republicans, who, as far as I'm concerned, are not really fundamentally different from, it's a one-party system. They campaign differently, they use different rhetoric, but
we were just talking about collectivism, and to me, it's pretty clear at this point that both Democrats and Republicans are about as collective as you can get. They're just collective. It's just collectivism with their own separate groups, almost to weaponize them against each other and make everybody else blind.
Yeah. There's a brilliant quote, and fine. If there are people who can serve and really have actual conservative, like,
Rand or Massey.
Rand or Massey, I want to be left alone without like classical liberal values. This doesn't apply to them, but some guy said conservatives, or the modern conservative movement, is progressivism driving the speed limit. What does he mean by that? Oh, I want a trillion stimulus package, print trillions. Oh, isn't that crazy? Romney comes up, let's print 600 billion. Oh, okay, we solved the problem there.
That's a Malice quote, if I'm not mistaken, and I 100% agree with it. To me, it's like the Republicans, a good example of this is the gay marriage issue. So, like, if you go back just a few years, Republicans were opposed to gay marriage, and now widely they're accepting to it. And then if you go a few years forward, they're going to be accepting to the transgender movement. And I think that's a good representation of kind of how they basically slowly just become the same. And they're just always slowly becoming each other, kind of in this infinite loop. And because they pit everybody else against each other, kind of with the two-party system, there's never anybody to kind of clear out the cogs in a sense. And every once in a while, there was somebody, there was like a Ron Paul who came along and kind of got a movement started. And so that's kind of, I think, what we need at this point. Now, I don't know if that's with Massey or Rand. Obviously I'm a big supporter of Dave Smith and him running possibly. I think we need a voice that's doing what Ron Paul did in a sense, even if it's obviously not exactly the same, but doing, that kind of punchy kind of messaging to try to pull some of these people in the right and left who are waking up to how insane the headline of Republicans seek meeting with Biden on better response to Cuba crackdown is. Like, the more people realize how insane headlines like these are and how insane the ideology that backs them is, the better. So getting somebody up there who can talk to people and really kind of voice those opinions is important.
Yeah. So it ain't Biden. Yeah, it ain't Biden. So let me break this down. I'm going to actually give because it's a different situation, give a different recommendation on this one based on Leeson's work that I've been reading. So Republicans seek to meet with Biden on a better response to Cuba crackdown. And the funny thing is both parties want to intervene, and there's no party that's like, hey, can't we leave things alone and let individual citizens help?
Let Cuba do Cuba.
Yeah, let Cuba do Cuba, and let Cuban Americans and people who have solidarity with that movement help them, as opposed to, because every time they say let's help them out, I always get the feeling like, hey, the intelligence agencies are like, oh man, you're having a rough time. Sorry to hear that. Let me help you get rid of this guy. Didn't you install him? Yeah, but we got a better guy now. Oh, okay. Lovely.
A shiny and new dictator for you.
Shiny and new dictator. Yeah. We picked this. We picked our CIA's finest to help you out. So what are they doing? A group of congressional Republicans wrote to President Biden, discuss how the U.S. can better respond to anti-government protests in Cuba. 19 lawmakers include Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, Senator Marco Rubio of Florida, requested to sit down and determine how the administration and Congress can work together to bring an end to the communist regime in Havana and liberate the Cuban people. Hundreds of Cubans took to the streets earlier to protest food shortages, rising prices amid the thing that's going on. Many of them chanting "Freedom, enough, libertad," and some pretty awesome slogans. Monday evening, a crowd of Cuban Americans staged a rally outside the White House to encourage the administration to back the protests. Now, GOP lawmakers said after decades, this is a moment when the U.S. can change the course of human history for the better. Oh boy, does that actually scare me, though. The United States is a bastion of freedom and democracy. Democracy is not a good thing.
That quote, that last quote about bringing a better future, that is straight out of a CIA or FBI handbook. That is Fed 101. Yeah, we're going to make it all better.
Yeah,
just some good old-fashioned regime change.
But don't you know, what I find so funny is that they're all interested. Oh yeah, let's change the human history. Let's get a leader in. Oh, Russia interfered with our elections. We're sad. Okay.
And here's a question. I see a lot of libertarians talking about this, but is there a legitimate way, and I know nothing about this, but is there a legitimate way that American citizens could get guns to Cuba?
We'll get into that. I'll give you my opinion on that. A beacon across the globe to cast off the shackles of communist oppression. I have opinions about that. We can get into that in another show. A beacon across the globe for those seeking to cast shackles, and do all that stuff. And yes, America, as far as living in it and the citizens, yes, that is true. Not the government, though. So I agree with half of that. Yes, we still have some vestiges of a free market that and a lot of freedoms, a lot of amazing stuff here. But is the government really interested in that? No. So Republicans said this is a pivotal moment being squandered by indecision and a failure to lead. The administration last week sanctioned a Cuban official and a government agency. And basically what he's saying is
that sentence is also just as scary as the last quote. anytime that the federal government is sending anybody into another country to do anything, I don't think that's going to be positive. And at this point, right, you have a group of people who are clearly protesting over not having the ability to own things, freely trade, from what I understand. So at that point, it is the U.S.'s job. It's the U.S.'s duty as a country, the way that we exist currently, to allow them to do their own thing. They have just as much a right to have a revolution or overthrow a government as any other country in the world. If we look at what's happening in France, we look at what's happening in the UK, Canada. I'm not sure if you're familiar. There's a YouTuber named Viva Fry who I watch regularly. He's a lawyer, and typically I'm not a huge fan of a lot of lawyers, but his opinions on a lot of issues have been really good. His point of view from Canada is insane. What they're doing there, as far as the COVID regime goes, is nuts. And then in the Cuban side of things, where you have a government that's stealing and taking the rights of private property, it's their right to fight for their freedom, just like anybody else. So I don't think the U.S. should be doing either. I think the U.S. should just be stepping out entirely.
I'll actually give you some statistics on what I think is the best option and why I agree with you. And just to end this, a bunch of countries signed on a statement condemning Cuba for arresting protesters. The Cuban government has responded.
I'm okay with that, but that doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, that's kind of symbolic. It's like the UN, like, bad, you did bad. Okay, we did bad. Is
racism irrational and repugnant?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like these statements, like feel-good statements, like, violence is bad.
Oh, it's one of those things. To me, it's if I know my own morals, I don't need to say that over and over again. Yeah. So to me, they don't know their morals, because they're going to have to sign on pen and paper saying that they disagree with this. You shouldn't have to sign on pen and paper. Yeah. The people that support you, if they are dumb enough to support you, should expect you to call this out for what it is.
I mean, honestly, like I wouldn't be like, hey, we said beer is alcoholic. Oh, you did? Yeah. Can we write it down on paper? We're issuing a statement. Beer is alcoholic.
Fire burns. This just in.
You're not. I didn't know that. Wow, we're a great news station. So the U.S. will continue to support the Cuban people's desire for freedom and to determine their own future. Funny enough, they don't support that here. But this jointment demonstrates that Cuban people are not alone in their aspirations, which is good. And there's other.
I'd like to point out that the people who signed that paper will have to get vaccinated to continue to keep their job. Just saying. Which although I disagree with, is you have to admit that's amusing.
Yeah, no.
Because they have to put their money where their mouth is. And this was the argument I gave from the beginning is if they want us to take a vaccine it isn't tested very much, and I don't know what I want to get into as far as, YouTube stuff, but the fact is that they're not taking any liability for the vaccines, and that's a fact.
Yeah.
If you get the vaccine and you have a medical reaction to it, there's nothing for you.
You can't do anything.
There's no recourse. You can't get financial help with medical bills. You won't be able to get help with emotional distress or the fact that you might die. In the case of somebody like me, where I'm young, I'm 21 going on 22, but I am way overweight. I'm the libertarian neckbeard at this point. It is the fact that even though I am in that class of people who might want to worry about this more than others, I got the virus and I walked through it. So it's like, I don't know how much sympathy I can show for people anymore on the vaccine front. I am over the charade as far as putting this at the top of the priority, because you have to prioritize the individual, and the entire vaccine process is doing the exact opposite of that. The very system of only vaccinating certain age groups is proving that they're not looking at the individual in a way. So I think the entire vaccine system was bunk to begin with, and I think it would have been bunk under Trump too. It would have been regardless.
Bunk under anyone. But I want to make a specific recommendation based on Cuba, based on Peter T. Leeson's work and stuff that I've read, aside from any procedure, and that's this, because this is complicated. So we look at the situation. Yes, communism doesn't work because of the economic calculation problem, because it restricts human freedom, and because with any authoritarian system, in my opinion, when you centralize power, you cannot trust those people. And as we know, it has never really worked anywhere.
I don't think it can work.
I think the only way you can make systems like that work is if everybody comes on and voluntarily agrees to it, and I think much like
any kind of socialist or even communist kind of outlook, it really has to do with scale. Something like that works with 50 people, but the second somebody becomes greedy, which always happens, the entire system falls apart. Yeah, and I mean that's what really the democracy is to a to a point.
Yeah, like Herman Hoppe said.
Yeah, it's 50% of the world ruling over the other 50%. You've basically created a king in a new sense. It's just with some extra steps added.
Yeah, it's extra. De Tocqueville had a brilliant quote. He said, "Democracy is always right, but for the wrong reasons." So,
that is perfect.
Yeah,
I've never heard that quote. That's a bumper sticker and a half.
So actually, and even Hans Hermann Hoppe said democracy is actually a soft variant of communism, which makes sense. Because they're always saying, like,
logically that tracks for me as far as I'm concerned. I haven't actually read a ton from Hans Hermann Hoppe. I've watched a couple speaking events, but I'm hoping eventually to see him in person or something along those lines eventually.
Yeah. So let's say communism doesn't work, widespread because they're not voluntarily entering into it. This isn't
again. My grandmother was a hippie, and she was around when there were communes, and that works on a small scale. But the second you blow it up to anything larger than that, it falls apart. And realistically, the best actual communes have been Catholic in origin, from what I've looked into.
Yeah, religious ones. If it's religious, people will probably not want as much private property because it gets in the way of a connection with God.
It's much more charity based.
Yeah, and it makes sense because if you're checking your Instagram, like, hey, what are my homies posting? It's kind of hard to be one with Jesus or Allah or Yahweh when you're checking your notification and you have tons of like goofy stuff that I have. Your friends want to play on Xbox. So
I think that's a good reason why so many religious people that I know meditate. It's very similar. Yeah.
So communism doesn't work nationwide. So sorry, authoritarian left, and even right, authoritarian, the lib left, okay, we established where maybe it sort of kind of can work, but doesn't really unless there's a religious basis. So they're probably not happy. Okay, so if we look at the libertarian, the economic side on the right, there are people who say they want the government to get involved, but we know what'll happen there.
Regime change and lots of death.
Here's one question to ask yourself if you're thinking critically. Biden's saying, oh, I support this, I support the Cuban people. Well, there's stuff happening in France, Haiti, South Africa, Greece, all that. Why isn't he saying we stand in solidarity with those guys? They're fighting for liberty. So I find it weird he's just picking that one. Why is that? The intelligence agencies have their eyes. So definitely Republican lawmakers, all those people, we should not get involved. We should not have the U.S. government get involved in the Cuban government. That said, can there be stuff done? Yes. I think if you allow American citizens, especially Cuban Americans and people of solidarity, to help those people, that would be the best thing, to send them donations, food, support, whatever they need to do that. But here's
a harbor in Florida with lots of guns.
Yes, but everybody's talking about that. Let's say you do that. Now, I want to think a little bit long term here, and this brings me to this chart. So, let's say you get rid of the Castro regime. It's good, right? The biggest question is, okay, I got rid of it. What do I replace it with? Now, you're a little bit, younger than me, which is fine. I don't know if you looked into this, but when I was growing up, there was, if you're familiar with Somalia, there was an incident called Black Hawk Down.
I have actually done a little bit of research into that specifically, thanks to Scott Horton.
Okay, yeah, Scott Horton's great, antiwar.com. I actually got to see him speak. So, just to get, Somalia is one of these countries, and Peter T. Leeson did research, and he said there's actually an organization called the Fund for Peace and Freedom organization. They classify governments and states based on what they're able to do. Most governments in the world, and I can get the lecture for you, are classified, as he said, as weak or failed. Actually, if you look at government as a whole experiment, not just the United States or the UK or Australia, but if you look at it in terms of 200 countries, most governments hold on by a thread by the international community or by a thread by some other way.
They're all holding the same thread.
Yeah.
They're basically all tied up to each other.
Yeah. And Pete T. Leeson makes a good point. If you have an institution that calls itself the state, but it can't help you, can't provide protection, then you really don't have a functional government. You just have a predatory government. Now, C.A. Barre was horrible, even maybe worse than the, it involved, some of the worst human rights ever. So people will say, and I would actually say, yeah, the Castro regime may be a little bit better than that. Yeah. Is that a high bar to climb?
Not at all.
Not really. So when people make comparisons and they say, well, would anarchy or self-governance, I want to use the word self-governance in Cuba, be as good as welfare in the United States? I don't think it would. Is the option of a classical liberal government in Cuba something that you can just implement? Like, I think people think classical liberalism here in the United States is just like a software. I just take a computer and install it. No, people have different histories. People have different customs. You can't just put a classical liberal government even if you did it with the best of intentions, you can't just make the whole world classically liberal overnight. It can happen.
Absolutely not.
But I don't actually think, I think you can bypass classical liberalism, but you might be saying, why? What should Cuba do after this? I wouldn't mind if it goes stateless. And people in the international community, even my classical liberal friends, will freak out. Well, if you've studied Somalia, which what happened is C.A. Bari was gone, got removed. Warlords did fight each other. I'm not saying it's perfect. Somalia is not a wonderland, but if we look at every welfare indicator in Somalia, life expectancy got better. People who needed immunizations, for me, it got better. Physicians, more physicians.
So a big emphasis on the physicians. I've known 2 people who did volunteer work in places like Africa and areas like this where, especially I can imagine it was much worse kind of further back in history. But that is one of the most vital things that these areas need, because some of these areas have warlords and different groups that are causing problems, and those doctors are able to, a lot of times the people they're working on are not soldiers in that extent. They're just people who are caught in the crossfire. So seeing that increase is really positive, because I don't think there's much else that will cause that number to increase.
Yeah, almost every. Now, infants, having issues being born, radios, telephones per 1,000 got better, TVs. The only things that tanked a little bit, and I'm saying a little bit, were the literacy rate got a little worse and combined school enrollment got a little worse. Now, people will always want to go, well, I just want to put, even if they're well-meaning, I'm not talking about Joe or the intelligence community, even my well-meaning classical liberal friends will say, I want Cuba to have a United States-style government. The same way they thought Somalia could have a United States-style government. Now, Pete Leeson also breaks it down. That's probably not an option for them. Look at the history. It's like saying, hey, I would love to have 3,000 Bitcoins right now. That's not an option. That's not in my range.
How about 3,000 Dogecoin?
Yeah, I would love that too. And that is an option. But yeah, that's not an option for them.
Right. I would point out that you mentioned one of the numbers that didn't improve was literacy rate and schooling stuff. I would point out that the reason that might exist is because if you look at it from a completely logical standpoint, if you were having to take on the responsibility of putting forward a community that kind of keeps people alive and fed and taken care of, education is definitely less valuable in most of those situations than food and water and making sure that your gun wound is fixed. So certainly I would make the argument that the reason those numbers in literacy might have gone down is because those things got better, and one of those things just isn't a priority immediately.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, here's the thing. I don't actually feel terrible about this because, hey, school enrollment.
Less state schooling.
Yeah. Oh, my God. People aren't going to state schools. I'm very sad.
This is something that I have a little bit of knowledge on. I have never stepped foot in a public school. I've never been to a public school. The education that I have came from about a year of tutoring, maybe a year and a half of tutoring study through homeschooling, and then realistically just reading and doing stuff on my own. So one of the things that I talk to people a lot is about the schooling thing, because I don't credit myself as being a super intelligent person, obviously, but there is a certain bit of I didn't do it and I turned out all right that I have to apply to that argument.
I think you turned out, pretty awesome. I mean, I love the opinions you've given here. So yeah, the interesting
there's a horrible headline on the screen.
That is a bad headline, and we'll get into that. I think that was an interesting headline I found, though. That'll be our last one since we're getting to the top of the hour. But the point I want to make is from Cuba, yeah, I would really suggest if Cubans have internet or Cuban Americans, take a look at Pete T. Leeson's lecture, Anarchy Unbound. Really understand that in the developing world, they might be better off letting those central institutions that are held up by a thread go poof and finding decentralized ways of achieving self-governance, which we'd like to do here.
Absolutely.
But we do it in different ways. But as we saw with the welfare indicators in Somalia, I think there's good reason to believe in Cuba, welfare would drastically go up without any centralization.
And I want to put things in perspective a little bit. What is happening in Cuba, and I see a lot of libertarians making this kind of connection. What is happening in Cuba is not comparable to what is happening in the U.S.
No.
What is happening in Cuba is a socialist dictatorship that, on top of COVID restrictions, on top of shortages that have been caused by the U.S. themselves, there's a big difference between that and the lockdowns that exist here. Those exist in a much more fragile state, in my opinion. The lockdowns that exist in the U.S. are fragile to the extent that we can all go out tomorrow and march in the street, and realistically, it's going to be very difficult for us to be stopped. That's not what's happening.
And police will probably
people are being exactly there. People are being beaten. They are being, the videos that I've seen from the little bit of internet that people have, because so much of Cuba has been locked down to the extent that the government is actively knocking out the internet so that there isn't any outreach or videos shared from Cuba. And that is one of the most detestable things you could do, because that really is their connection to the outside world in an extent. And the comment that I make about, arming people, which I think is kind of a hot button issue at this point. The point that I would make is, again, I'm for the individual. So if an individual in Florida, which I've heard a couple people talking about, decides they have an ability to get people weapons, I don't see an issue with that, because you're just handing off your property to somebody else, and I'm completely all right with that.
I see an issue with three things. One, saying, "Oh, it wasn't real, socialism or communism," because how many times have we heard that? But right. I'm not going to harp on that, because I think people there get that it doesn't work. The issue I have here is this: A, the intelligence community is getting involved and just something bad happens again, or right. B, people who say, well, just give them a Western American, UK, Australian.
Absolutely not.
So great, but let's give them an American classical liberal government. I don't think that's an option for them. Everybody has.
Regardless of even if it was an option, it's not going to help them long term. No. It's going to put them right back into the same regime position, because eventually another dictator is going to come along through the left spectrum and take over. Yes. They need to have a kind of, people hate the term, but anarchist uprising in a sense, where they do need to government. Right.
Let's call it self-governing
exactly. Society. Right. So exactly. But taking back the power from the state and applying it back into their own lives. And the only way they're going to do that is through what they're doing right now. It's certainly not by sitting down and allowing the government to do what they're doing. Yeah. Any way that I think libertarians can support them, even if it is through messaging. I see so many bad libertarians on messaging. We have to make it clear what our opinions are here, because especially on the right is saying some really bad shit.
The right's saying some bad stuff. The mayor of Miami is terrible. So I want to do the right thing, which is this. If you care about the developing world, if you care about freedom there, these international communities who want all these governments to stay and are afraid they go poof, and bad things will happen, maybe for a while. But if you really care about statistics, if you look into
stabilize
research, then you shouldn't worry. You should actually look forward to seeing how self-governance can work on a large scale, similar to how it did in Somalia. And you can't compare Somalia to the U.S. because we have a better government. We have a different history, classical liberalism, and minarchism work here in a specific fashion, and they've worked here in a specific fashion, I should say, is breaking down even here. But to the credit of just economists who have researched this, I say, based on these statistics, it's worth the experiment, since just these social and political systems are all experiments, to give this experiment a try if you care about welfare for the developing world and establish a self-governing society. Which brings me to my last thing, opinion of the Washington Post. This is scary. Haiti needs elections and outside forces to make them safe. As we know, our friends in the intelligence community, I'm going to speculate, probably wanted to get rid of the president of Haiti for whatever reasons, but there's been a lot of gang violence, as we know. Since he's gone, there's been a lot of insecurity, stability problems, and without any credible elections, Haiti's having a lot of dysfunction. And understandably, they say neither Biden nor the UN Council have much appetite for sending troops to Haiti, which is going to be ridiculous. But whatever gains can be achieved, interventions have been short-lived. And without muscular outside intervention, there appears to be likelihood of tramping down of gang-fueled chaos. Basically they're saying, warlords fighting each other, gangs fighting each other. In the meantime, humanitarian suffering in Haiti, where the pandemic is raging, is only a minuscule share of the 11 million residents. And I'm just going to cut to the chase here. In their opinion, there is no way for Haiti to pull itself out of current, whereas without elections, and I would certify and legitimize a new government and legislation. How about not?
Yeah, so this is the exact same situation as Cuba at that extent. Again, and in this situation, I'm not sure what the regime there is like, because I haven't done a ton of research into Haiti in particular, but I haven't heard any rumblings of socialism per se, so I'm assuming it is just a very authoritarian kind of dictatorship, right?
I don't think they're as socialist, but they had problems. In my opinion, certain American administrations took advantage of their resources. I believe that. And
we're good at that.
Yeah, we're good at that. And it's just very authoritarian. It's not run well. And I'm saying, I'm giving a different recommendation for, if we wrap this all up, what I would say is Australia, Greece, France. Them read Murray Rothbard, see how you can start to structure re-society and break down those central institutions in a more formal top-down way. Because we have.
I would add in, to if you do read Rothbard and you like that, to expand and kind of read some other stuff to kind of open yourself up to the whole enchilada as far as the liberty movement goes. I think that ultimately there's going to be a lot of people waking up to this over the next 3 years. And I think by the time 2024 rolls around, especially here in the US, we are going to see a new generation of liberty-minded people. And I'm younger. I'm looking at this from a perspective of the people that I'm seeing. I see a lot more high schoolers and a lot more people going into college that are fed up with the federal government. And it doesn't really matter whether they're on the right or the left. They know who to target. And these people are going to schools that are actively going to try to push that idea out of their head. And I think that there's going to be a lot more pushback. And by 2024, those high schoolers are going to be able to vote. And so I think we're going to see a big shift in 2022 election-wise here in the US and 2024. But I think that as far as the planet goes, it is clear that people are not okay with the COVID regime, the COVID restrictions. They are not okay with being locked in their homes and having their rights taken away from them, not having the ability to travel. And so I think libertarians, including myself, need to be doing the best that we can to voice our opinions on that topic.
Yeah, and that's why we're here. That's why we're here with the Essential Libertarian. And just my recommendations in the world that we're in now, it's pretty crazy. So if you have the ability, the resources like in France, Germany, Greece, Britain, Ireland, even though we didn't specifically talk about it, check out Murray Rothbard's work, because they probably have access to internet. I would say with things in the developing world like Cuba and Haiti, maybe it's not so scary. And I'll show these statistics one more time, just based off historical research. Obviously, I could be wrong, right? I'm not going to say, hey, I'm always right. But maybe it's not so scary if those things just went poof. And if you really care about welfare, you shouldn't be scared. And the last thing I'll say is, I get people well-meaning will say just give them a classical liberal style government like we have here. That's probably not an option for them based on their history, cultural traditions, religions, and other practices. So that being said, that's the breakdown for Essential Libertarian today, giving you the tools to self-govern. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We are on Facebook and YouTube. I'll also be working on getting a podcast. I'm your host, Kareem Mays. I want to thank my co-host today, Leighton Radner, coming in from Seward, Alaska. Also, just to give a couple shout-outs, if you enjoyed the content of this podcast, if you want to keep the Ron Paul Liberty movement going, then go ahead and check out the Libertarian Party at lpmisescaucus.com. You can find resources there, podcasts. You can learn about the team. You can also join up if you want to start and keep the Ron Paul revolution going.
And if anybody from Alaska happens to watch this show, I am kind of handling things, I believe, from an organizer standpoint here in Alaska for the Mises Caucus. So if you are interested in learning about things and you want to reach out, I'm on Facebook, just my name, Leighton Radner, as it's on the screen. And I'm also on Twitter, which is Based Libertarian, @Based Libertarian, without the A. So it's just BSED Libertarian.
So go check him out. Also give a shout out to my boy Max Henry. Go check out the Max Henry podcast. And if you're into comic books, Jack Lloyd does some really cool comic books.
I will be seeing Jack Lloyd at YAL 2021, August 5th, and I'm super pumped to meet him for the first time.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I'll be not going, but hopefully I can be there with you guys in spirit. Also, I want to give one last shout out to Caleb, my friend Caleb Shreve, and Rob Luther, who are working on Defend the Guard. Let's use legislation to restrain politicians so they can't indefinitely send troops over to foreign conflicts that we shouldn't even be involved in the first place. With that said, thank you everyone who tuned in on Facebook and YouTube. This is the Essential Libertarian. I'm your host, Kareem Mays, giving you the abilities and the tools to self-govern. Have a good day wherever you're watching.
Thank you.